We've got one of the most talked about books in modern history today, but maybe you're going to learn something about the filth that got censored out that you didn't know already. Hey there, it's Matt here with Books Deconstructed. Today we're going to be looking at a book that is probably one of the most deconstructed books in modern literature history. It is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. We have a copy of it here that I'm going to go into. But first, I won't go into the literature side of this too much, the reading experience, because that's been done by pretty much everybody, and I'm not an intellectual, I'm not an academic, I'm not even really a particularly intelligent person, but I do know a little bit about books and collecting, so we're going to go into the publishing history and that side of things as well. As a beginning reader, you can get a lot out of this book. You can get a kick-ass, war, romance, thriller out of it. But if you look a little bit deeper into it, like Hemingway's books are supposed to be, like the iceberg theory says, which means that he didn't really say a lot, but he implied a lot. So you see him using deceptively simple language and just omitting things that you're left to your own devices to fill in. And this is one of his biggest books for the iceberg theory, definitely right up there with For Whom the Bell Tolls. Under the surface, there's PTSD, there's disillusionment with war, there's deeply traumatized people in a deeply traumatizing relationship, and of course there's an ending that is probably one of the shortest, fastest, least satisfying endings maybe in literature history. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it really leaves you up to your own imagination on how you want to end this in your head. I'm also really excited about this one because there's a lot of stories about this book. It's publishing history, the censorship that went into it, where it came from, the stories behind it, the number of endings that Hemingway tried out on this one before deciding on the one that is kind of epic. In fact, Hemingway wrote more than 40 endings to this book before deciding on this one that is really either unsatisfying or deeply satisfying, depending on who you are. And a lot of people consider this Hemingway's most autobiographical book, and I think I figured out why that is. Like, you have a protagonist who is an ambulance driver in World War I, and he's wounded in the knee, and he falls in love with a nurse during recovery and has a huge disillusionment with war. And the author, if you think about it this way, the author is also an ambulance driver in World War I who is wounded in the knee and falls in love with the nurse that helps heal him and becomes deeply disillusioned with the idea of war. So, I mean, if you squint really hard, you can kind of see some parallels in this, maybe. So here's a fun fact that surprises literally nobody who knows anything about Hemingway. He hated being censored. And so when this originally came out as a series of magazine articles, they told him they were going to eliminate certain words out of the book when it was a magazine, but they would add those back in when it was published as a book. Well, Scribner's kind of lived up to their word to Hemingway. They added back in most of the words that they had edited out for the magazine, but they didn't add all of them back in. They added in Jesus Christ. They added back in whore and whorehound, but they didn't add in the big three, the F word, the S word, and the CS word. So Hemingway took a couple copies of the first printing of the book that he was going to give to some of his friends, including James Joyce, and he wrote back in by hand some of the words that had been edited out of those copies, including the F word, the S word, and the CS word. So let's get into this copy of the first edition here, and I'll show you how you can identify it as a first edition, and I'll give you some more information about it. Earlier I said there were 37,000 copies of the first edition, the first printing made, and there's actually only 31,000. I was wrong about that. Starting with the front cover, you can see there's been some material loss on here along the bottom and the top and the bottom of the spine, the foot of the spine and the head of the spine, as well as looks like there might be some worm action happening on the title there. Same on the back. You'll see all these. These are first edition points. These are, the way this is written is indicative of a first printing here, but I'll go into more detail about that here. And as book collectors know, you open the front cover, and you always hope to find an unclipped dust jacket. And this one, so even though it has some material loss at the top, it didn't lose the price, $2.50, indicative of a first edition, first printing. And as I always tell people, if you really want to know if you have a first printing, turn to the copyright page. There's a lot of end papers here, 1929. And here we go. We have the seal down here, the Scribner seal. It's also called the colophon if you're a book geek, but you can just call it the seal. Sometimes the first edition with Scribners is noted by the seal and an A, or an A without a seal. But you can look this up, and the first edition, first printing of A Farewell to Arms is denoted by a seal with no A on it. But there's not one that exists with an A, so you don't have to worry about mistaking those. And now I want to get into something that is really a lot more interesting to me as a collector, and kind of can be interesting to non-collectors as well. If you look at the front here, this is one way you can tell that this is a first edition dust jacket. Is it has a misspelling of one of the main characters' name, Catherine Barclay here, with a K. It's supposed to be with a C. Her name is with a C throughout the book. But here it's misspelled. And this is interesting because misprints don't make books more valuable, like they do with baseball cards and some other collectibles. However, sometimes the misprint can be used to identify a first edition, which is like it is here. So that little K right there identifies this as a first edition. The fact that it is misspelled is not valuable, doesn't make this book any more valuable, but the fact that it is, it indicates that this is a first edition, that's what makes it valuable. So let's say that your copy of the 44th printing of Harry Potter and the Dungeon of Dragons or whatever got cut all ganky by the printer. Then no, it's not worth more, even though the mistake is probably more rare than the one that's done correctly. It's actually worth less because it's just a mess up book you have now, and it's really could be hard to read. But if that printing error happened only on the first few copies of the first printing, then collectors would fall all over themselves to get their hands on it, because it's denoted by being a mistake. The first printing is denoted by being a mistake. The mistake itself is not what makes it rare. Is that clear as mud? Okay, good. And that's about it for A Farewell to Arms and from Books Deconstructed. So thanks for watching, I guess. Click, like, share, subscribe, live, laugh, love, touch paper, whatever I'm supposed to say here.